الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره نعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا تجد له وليا مرشدا أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صفي من خلقه وحبيبه والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين محمد مصطفى صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. We're going to talk about, dear brothers, one of the greatest conquests in military history, and this is the conquest of Constantinople, which took place on the 29th of May 1453 at the hands of a great Muslim commander known as Muhammad al-Fatih. Now this city has been prophesied that it will be conquered by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself. When he was asked a question by the Sahaba, O Messenger of Allah, which of the two cities will be conquered first, Constantinople or Rome? He said it will be Constantinople. And another hadith narrated by Imam Ahmad in his Musnad, he said, ليفتحن قسطنطينية على رجل على في يد رجل فلنعم أمير أميرها ولنعم جيش جيشها أو جيش ولنعم جيش ذلك أو كما قال. He said that Constantinople will be conquered at the hands of a man. So blessed be the Emir of that conquest, and blessed be that army. And so, as a result, ever since the time of the Sahaba, they have wanted to conquer Constantinople because they wanted to be that blessed army and they wanted to be that blessed Emir. Now, the city of Constantinople, it was regarded as, at that time, one of the most important and largest cities of the world. And it was established as early as 330, after Isa alayhi salam, at the hands of a Christian called Constantine I. It was the capital of the Byzantine Empire. It was built by the best Greek engineers to withstand a siege. And Constantinople, the city, it was bound in all three sides by sea. Okay? Now, you had the Bosphorus, with the Straits of Bosphorus. Basically, if you look at your maps, you will see the Black Sea, and you see a narrow passage. That is known as the Straits of Bosphorus. Okay? The Straits of Bosphorus. That narrow passage, the straits which lead from the Black Sea and through the two continents, through Asia and Europe, that is known as the Bosphorus. And then also it was surrounded from the south by the Sea of Marmora. There's a little sea there, it's called the Sea of Marmora. And then there was also another side, and this time if you turn over your other maps that I have given you, if you turn over your other maps, you will see now that from the Bosphorus there is another body of water that cuts into the European continent, and that is known as the Golden Horn. That is known as the Golden Horn. And so you can see that on three sides Constantinople was surrounded by water, and only one side is exposed. The extreme western wall, that was the only side that was exposed, that was the only side on the land. But that side was protected by a deep moat and a strong triple wall. And that was at the time of Constantine I. So you can see that defensively this was a very, very strong fort and almost impossible to lay siege to. Now during the time of Uthman radiallahu anhu, Muawiyah under his command, he made several incursions into Anatolia. You can see where Anatolia is on your map, against Constantine II. And he caused severe defeats against the Romans, but they couldn't lay siege to Constantinople. And then when Muawiyah radiallahu anhu became the Khalif, he launched a final campaign against them, with several of the illustrious Sahaba under the command of a Sahaba called Busr ibn Abi Artah. Busr ibn Abi Artah, he was in charge of the campaign. And this happened in 53 years after the Prophet ﷺ, after the Hijrah, or 672 after Isa alayhi salam. The campaign under Busr ibn Artah lasted 7 years, but it was not successful. And in fact, it led to the death and the shahada of 30,000 of those illustrious Muslims, including Abu Ayyub al-Ansari. He was 80 years old at that time. 80 years old, he was on a boat, and they were, besieging Constantinople. After this campaign failed, then Sulaiman, Umayyad Khalif, he also held siege to Constantinople, because he heard a hadith that the Emir who conquers Constantinople will be named after a prophet. He heard this hadith, and his name was Sulaiman, so he thought that it will be me, and so he tried all efforts to conquer Constantinople, and he gathered a grand army of 180,000 of the Muslims, and had a very strong naval force also to attack Constantinople. It's impossible to attack Constantinople only by land forces. You must attack it through a naval invasion as well. And he ordered the building of more than 1,800 ships to attack Constantinople. Now the mistake that Sulaiman made is that he entrusted on a Christian man called Leo. Now Leo was to trick the emperor of Constantinople, and he was to take the city, and then he was going to submit the city to Sulaiman. And Leo he wasn't a big emperor or a big king, but Sulaiman thought he could use this man, this Christian. And when Leo caused a revolt inside Constantinople and took over the city, he then refused to surrender the city to Sulaiman. In fact, he attacked the ships of Sulaiman, and a battle raged, and the Muslims, they suffered a very, very, very heavy defeat. Many of the Muslims lost their lives, and out of the 1,800 ships that were sent, very few of the ships, they came back. So this was a real disgrace for the Muslims, and as a result, when Sulaiman, he died, then Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, he became the next Caliph, and he immediately ordered all the troops to go back, and he raised the siege after the death of Sulaiman. Okay, in the time of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, his time of Khilafah wasn't known by lots of conquests, rather he concentrated in rebuilding the Islamic Khilafah. And so, after this very disastrous siege and these incidents with Leo, the Muslims, they didn't hold siege to Constantinople for more than 735 years. They left Constantinople alone because they knew how difficult it was. And then later, when the Uthmani Khilafah came into existence under the command of one of the Caliphs at that time, his name was Bayezid, he managed to held the city to siege in the year 1393. And he almost conquered it. But what happened is the Mongols, under the name of a commander called Timurlan, they started to ravage the Uthmani lands, and therefore he had to lift the siege and go back and sort out the Mongol invasion, and therefore he couldn't be sieged at the time of Bayezid. And then Murad II, several times he tried also to take over the city, but all efforts were in vain. It was impossible to take over the city because of the strong fortress of Constantinople. But the honor was to go to his son, who's known as Muhammad al-Fatih, or as they call him Mehmet in Turkish. Now Muhammad al-Fatih, if we quickly study and have an overview of his young life and the kind of person that he was. His father gave him an excellent education. His father was keen that Muhammad al-Fatih grows up to be a complete man, and gave him the most perfect education that any father could give him. And he knew 6 languages, including Arabic. He spoke pure Fusha Arabic, despite not being an Arab. Turkish, Greek, Latin, Persian, and Hebrew. And Muhammad al-Fatih, he was trained in all of the sciences, in maths and physics and chemistry. He was also trained in philosophy. And one thing special about Muhammad al-Fatih, just like we studied about Salahuddin Ayyubi, is he loved the scholars and he would surround himself with scholars, and he was well versed in Islamic sciences. And he himself could have been a scholar. This was his caliber. His shaykh was somebody called Ahmad ibn Ismail al-Kawrani, who at that time was known as the Abu Hanifa of his time. And so the shaykh Ahmad Ismail al-Kawrani, he memorized Muhammad al-Fatih the Quran. And this Muhammad al-Fatih himself, just to show how sincere he was in studying knowledge, he would make contact with the shaykh of Imam al-Suyuti. Okay, and we know who Imam al-Suyuti was. Muhammad al-Fatih would be in contact with him and send him fatwas and ask him questions. Muhammad al-Fatih, he would engross himself in worship in the night time and would always be praying in the masjid 5 times a day in jama'ah. And he used to hate the life of luxury. The life of luxury was something that he shunned, and especially in sitting with the company of jokers and people who used to fool around. He was also trained as a superb horseman and a superb soldier. And one thing that Muhammad al-Fatih did from an early age is he studied the losses of the Muslims when they tried to capture Constantinople. He studied Constantinople and the history of Constantinople and the fortress of Constantinople. And he heard a hadith, this hadith that we spoke about, that Constantinople will be conquered at the hands of a man, so blessed indeed will be that man, and blessed will be the army. And this hadith, when he was a very young lad, it inspired him. And he said to himself that I want to be that leader. I want to be that man that will conquer Constantinople. Now, when Muhammad al-Fatih was 12 years old, because of his brilliance and his superb intellect, his father, Murad II, he abdicated. Murad II got very tired of all the politics and all the, the difficulties in running a state, and he wanted to isolate himself and concentrate in ibadah. So he allowed Muhammad al-Fatih to take the reins of power when he was only 12 years old. But after internal problems and revolts, and because the enemies were threatening the borders, his father had to come back into power and rule again once as a Khalif. And then his father, when he died in 1451, Muhammad al-Fatih, at the age of 19, he became again the Khalif of the Muslims. So he was the Khalif of the Muslims at the age of 19, of the whole of the Uthmani Khilafah at the age of 19. And many of us here, we have surpassed 19 by many years. And Muhammad al-Fatih, he was determined to take over Constantinople, to conquer Constantinople and be that man described in the hadith. And therefore, he made many preparations. Okay, and even before he announced the formal announcement of the attack of Constantinople, which was on January 1453, not 1452, but 1453, he made several preparations. And therefore not giving the disbelievers, the kuffar, not giving them the opportunity to prepare themselves, or allowing the other kuffar to come to their aid. Because Muhammad al-Fatih knew that for the kuffar to come to the aid of their fellow Christians, it would probably take a couple of months. And so therefore time was of the utmost essence. He couldn't disclose the secrets to even his own soldiers. And he waited until, January 1453. How did Muhammad al-Fatih prepare for the conquest of Constantinople? Many of the Muslims, they failed. So what was Muhammad al-Fatih doing that was so unique? The first thing that he did is he vastly increased the number of his forces until they reached 250,000, which at that time was one of the largest armies in Europe. We mentioned how yesterday Musta'sim, the Khalif of Baghdad, he reduced the army of Baghdad to 10,000. And look at the difference between Muhammad al-Fatih and him. Muhammad al-Fatih increased the army to 250,000. And he gave all his troops special training on all the different types and arts of warfare. All the different types of warfare that existed at the time, all these troops were given training in. In addition to this, Muhammad al-Fatih, he further developed at that time the Muslim special forces. Because this idea of special force actually was invented by the Uthmanis. Because they invented a group of special soldiers that were given special training. They were known as al-Inkishari, the Inkishari forces, or known as the Janissaries in English. And Muhammad al-Fatih gave them extra training and developed them even further. He also nurtured into the soldiers the spirit of jihad, and he constantly told them about the hadith of the conquest of Constantinople. Not only this, like I mentioned yesterday, the good leader, the good Amir, the good Khalif, he would always surround himself with the ulama who had honor and dignity. And Muhammad al-Fatih, just like Muzaffar Qutuz surrounded himself with Al-Aziz ibn Abdul Salam, Muhammad al-Fatih, he surrounded himself and his troops with the scholars of jihad. And they would lift the spirits of the army, and they'd always increase and motivate the army. And then what else did Muhammad al-Fatih do? If you look at your map, you will see on the Straits of Bosphorus, yeah? In Anatolia, the Asian side, the Asian sector, Bayezid had already developed a fortress, okay, all the way up to the Straits of Bosphorus, near the Black Sea. Muhammad al-Fatih, he built a fortress also in parallel to the fortress that Bayezid had built, and he called this fortress on the European side, called Rumeli Hisar. Rumeli Hisar, if you see this on your map, this was the fortress that was built by Muhammad al-Fatih, and if the map was extended even more, you would see Bayezid's fortress. So those fortresses, they lay in parallel to each other. That fortress, Rumeli Hisar, it took 139 days to build, and it was completed on the 31st August 1452. And the purpose of this fortress was as such. These fortresses were supported by huge cannons, and any ship that was sailing from the Black Sea down the Straits of Bosphorus to bring in goods and supplies into Constantinople, that ship was basically shelled and sunk. So no ships were allowed to bring extra supplies or men to Constantinople. So basically there was an economic blockade of Constantinople from that side. And despite Constantine the 11th, who was the emperor at that time, despite his protest, Muhammad al-Fatih, he continued to keep up this operation. Also, Muhammad al-Fatih himself, this is the Amir of the Muslims. He went on reconnaissance missions. He actually went to the walls of Constantinople and scaled the walls of Constantinople himself, okay, with few of his soldiers. He looked at the soil, the content of the soil, the chemical constitution of the soil, and the walls, how thick they were, how large they were. He measured all of these things because he had a plan ready for Constantinople and the attack of Constantinople. Not only this, he hired a Hungarian engineer whose name was Urban. He hired him, and he gave him a huge salary, 4 times more than even Urban had demanded. So he just keeps him happy. And Urban was he excelled in making cannons. And Muhammad al-Fatih ordered him to build a cannon which was capable of penetrating the walls of Constantinople. Capable of penetrating those walls. And Muhammad al-Fatih, he was also himself an engineer and a mathematician. So he went to the walls himself, measured them, and he realized the force that would be needed to break those walls and the type of cannon. And he ordered Urban to build that cannon. And he was in constant consultation with him, as if he was the one himself, making this cannon. And then this cannon was eventually built. The largest cannon that was produced at that time, it was 27 feet, or approximately 27 feet long, and it was 6 foot wide at its muzzle. And this cannon, it needed 60 oxen, okay, to carry it. 60 oxen to carry this huge cannon. And when they test fire this cannon, it's through a cannonball which weighed 1.2 tons, 1 mile long, and when they eventually found this cannon, they found it buried 6 foot under the ground, okay, 6 foot deep. It hit the ground 6 foot deep when they eventually found it. See the preparation that they are making. Yeah, they know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will help the Muslims with victory, but the Muslims, they have to make the preparations. They have to have the weapons that are in place, okay, because all the other Muslims, they tried before, but they couldn't. They need the weapons to carry out this siege. Also, Muhammad al-Fatih, the Uthmanis were not known as excellent naval force, so he wanted to surprise them with a naval force. So he ordered discreetly the building of many ships on several ports around the Black Sea and the Sea of Marmora and other places, so that the Byzantines, they don't realize. Now, what was the defense of Constantinople? We've already mentioned some of the defense. Now, Constantinople, of the 3 sides of Constantinople, yeah, of the 3 sides, if you look at your maps, you see 3 sides. The side which was, lying parallel to the Sea of Marmora and the western wall, the landward side, okay, those 2 sides out of the 3 sides, they were surrounded by walls, by very, very strong and tough walls. And firstly, there was a ditch which was 60 foot wide, and then there was an outer wall which was 20 foot high, 25 foot high, and also after the outer wall there was another ditch which was 60 foot in width, and then there was an inner wall which was 40 foot high, and then interspersed between the walls were towers that were 60 foot high. So both the sides, the Sea of Marmora and the western side, were surrounded by this wall. The only weak side was the side of the Golden Horn. Coming from the Strait of Bosphorus, you can see the Golden Horn. So this side had a weak wall and the wall wasn't strong. But in defense, so that to defend this wall, what did the Byzantines do? They erected a chain, a huge, massive chain between Constantinople, and you can see here it says Pera. Okay, if you can see Pera in the map, okay, there is a chain. It says here boom. That boom represents the chain. That chain would prevent any ships from crossing into the Golden Horn and attacking the weak wall. We said that 3rd wall was the weak wall, and it was the only wall that was capable of going down. And so that boom, any ship would try to come, the chain would be raised, and no ship would be able to pass through the chain. Because the city was surrounded by water from all the sides, or all 3 sides, the Byzantines were very confident because of their strong naval force, that no naval force of the Uthmanis can defeat them. And as long as they've got a strong naval force, then supplies can continue to come into Constantinople, and also their allies from the other nations could come in and aid them. And so because the Golden Horn had this chain on it, much of the defense was concentrated on the outer wall, especially the western side, which for them was the most weak. If this wasn't defended properly, Constantinople could fall. So the wall on the western side, you see the wall of Theodosius, that wall was the most well defended. Also, the Byzantines, they were Orthodox Greeks, and there was a power struggle between the Orthodox Greeks and the Catholic Greeks. Now, just because as he realized that Muhammad al-Fatih is coming, Constantine the 11th, the Byzantine emperor, he said, let's unite the 2 churches. Okay, and he made moves to unite the 2 churches, but this actually had the opposite effect, because the people of Byzantine, the people of Constantinople, they revolted against this, and therefore it caused unrest and weakened the position of Constantine the 11th. Now, the attack, it began on the 5th of April 1453, not 1452. And the attack occurred with ships and cannons simultaneously. Now before the attack, the troops were encouraged to read Quran, and they were told of the benefits of martyrdom and the importance of shahada in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And on their side, many scholars, Muhammad al-Fatih put many scholars into the army to constantly encourage the troops. The land army was split up into three groups. The side that was attacking the western wall, the land army, was split up into three groups. And then all the ships were also told to surround the city. On the 6th of April 1452, Muhammad al-Fatih, he orders formally Emperor Constantine XI to give up the city without a fight, and him and his family will be safe and secure. But this was refused. And then he ordered the huge cannon, built by that engineer Urban, to be fired. And it was fired on, if you look at the wall of Theodosius, on that side, towards the northern area, the cannon was fired, and it destroyed a large part of the wall. But quickly, and this was the skill of the Byzantines, they quickly rebuilt the wall. So the cannon, and the Muslims all shouted takbir, because the cannon worked. The cannon worked, and it destroyed the strong walls of Constantinople. Now, to further demoralize the kuffar, Muhammad al-Fatih, apart from ordering the cannons to fire continuously, as soon as this cannon fired, the cannons continued to fire and didn't stop firing. And they fired day after day after day. And to even demoralize them further, Muhammad al-Fatih, he occupied some of the fortresses and islands that belonged to the Greeks, to show the power of the Muslims on some of the coasts. Now, we mentioned this chain which ran across the Golden Horn, and none of the Muslims, they were able to penetrate this chain. And in fact, by the Byzantine Empire, Constantine XI, he called for the help of his ally Justinian. And Justinian, he was an extremely shrewd commander, and he brought with him 700 of his elite guards, and they managed to break through. There were only 5 ships. They managed to break through the Muslim armada, and they managed basically the chain was lowered for them, and Justinian's forces could go in, and as soon as the Muslims tried, the chain was raised. Muslims tried, in vain to cross this chain, but many Muslims lost their lives in trying to cross this chain. They found that the walls, the outer walls, the western walls, was very strong, and it's always being rebuilt, and they couldn't find a hole in which to penetrate. On the 18th of April, the cannons again managed to penetrate the western side of the wall, and this time the special forces, the Inkishari forces, they managed to break the defense. But after 4 hours of fighting, they were forced to withdraw. But the purpose had succeeded, because fear entered the hearts of the enemies. Because for the first time they see their walls have been scaled, their walls have been damaged, and here Muslim forces are entering into their city. They held them back and they had to withdraw, but fear had entered the hearts of the enemy. Unfortunately for the Muslims, more and more of the support from the kuffar was entering into the city. They could pass through the Muslim armada, i.e. the naval strength of the kuffar was stronger than the Muslims, and they managed to cause slaughter amongst the Muslim armada. As a result, Muhammad al-Fatih was deeply angered, and he fired the commander of the armada and he replaced him with another man. Some of the close people of Muhammad al-Fatih, realizing that the siege isn't happening, they're destroying the walls, but the walls are being rebuilt, they cannot penetrate it anyhow, this chain is still erected, what can they do? And they said, we should raise the siege and go back to and lift the siege. But Muhammad al-Fatih, he refused. And Muhammad al-Fatih, he realized that there will be no way to take Constantinople unless the weak wall of the Golden Horn, that wall is taken, or that wall is attacked. Because if that wall is attacked, it will mean that all the defense positions that are defending the western wall, they will run from their positions and relocate themselves at the wall of the Golden Horn. Yeah, is that understood by everybody? And therefore, it will divide the power, and this means there will be less men on the western wall, and they could attack the western wall as well. Because at the moment, the western wall was too strong, and those defending the western wall, it was too impregnable. But how is he going to attack? How is he going to go through this chain? And here is one of the greatest military feats in history happened. The greatest military feats in history happened, and it earned the respect, okay, even of the enemies of Muhammad al-Fatih. The enemies, they were Greeks. They said about Muhammad al-Fatih, by this operation that he did, and I'm going to mention it, he has even surpassed Alexander the Great. You know, who was a Greek. He has even surpassed him. And what was this operation that he did? You can see this chain. It's not written down as the boom. They couldn't get through this chain. So, Muhammad al-Fatih, he ordered the cutting down of trees. Alright? But he didn't let the kuffar know. He ordered the cutting down of trees. And then he also ordered many barrels of grease and oil to be bought. And then on the night of the 21st of April, without the knowledge of the enemies, basically, you see where Rumeli Hisar is, if you go a bit further down, okay, where it's written Bosphorus, from that region, he ordered the logs to be laid on the landward side. They were cut down and they were all laid down all the way up to the Golden Horn. And that path wasn't a straight path. It was hilly, it was mountains, it was woody, it was very difficult. And then he ordered the logs all to be greased. And then he ordered his men to drag 70 ships across the logs, across the land. It's 3 miles this was, by the way. 3 miles he ordered, okay, 70 ships to go across this land. And this was by a miracle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imagine this, dragging 70 ships, men dragging 70 ships. In one night. Okay, in one night. What happened? The kuffar, they woke up to the sound of their ships being attacked and their ships in the Golden Horn burning. They couldn't believe their eyes. They could see, when they wake up, they could see ships riding across the land. And they couldn't believe this. Imagine this, right? Imagine the enemy, and you see ships going across the land being dragged by men. And then those ships were attacking the kuffar ships and destroying them. And so this earned Muhammad al-Fatih, to the Greeks themselves, a commander who surpassed even Alexander the Great. Now this action, it severely demoralized the enemy forces, and weakness began to appear in the hearts of the enemies, because now they needed to defend not only the western wall but also the wall of the Golden Horn. And the Muslims, they concentrated their firepower and all their efforts now on the wall of the Golden Horn. Another method, all of this was done simultaneously. Muhammad al-Fatih also, at the same time, what did he do? He dug tunnels from where he was, from the landward side, right down into the city. He dug tunnels, and the kuffar, they could hear the digging. And the kuffar also dug tunnels to meet the Muslims. And as they're digging tunnels and they see another tunnel, the Muslims thought this was a secret passage. And they took that passage, and the kuffar, they realized that the Muslims were there, and they put hot oil over them and they ambushed them. But did Muhammad al-Fatih stop when all those Muslims were ambushed? No. He continued to dig tunnels. And so the effect was to put fear into the hearts of the enemies. Because, hour after hour, one tunnel is popping up inside the walls of Constantinople, inside the city. And when they manage to, snuff out this tunnel, another tunnel appears, and another. And Muslims that are appearing inside the city, and they don't know how they're doing this. And this had the effect of causing terror into the hearts of the enemy. This is a very important concept, to strike terror into the hearts of the enemy. Allah says, تُرْهِبُونَ بِي عَدُوَّ اللَّهِ وَعَدُوَّكُمْ. So you strike terror, prepare against the utmost of your strength to strike terror into the hearts, okay, of the enemy. Okay, and the enemies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another strategy that the Muslims used, it wasn't only one strategy, just attack the Golden Horn with these ships. Another strategy, Muhammad al-Fatih, he ordered the building of huge towers, which are 3 levels. And he ordered those towers to be doused with water, so that if the kuffar would shoot at them with arrows, with fire arrows, then the towers wouldn't burn. And those towers were then basically pushed against the walls of Constantinople, and then the Muslims, they could scale the walls and attack. And the Muslims, they managed to reach the wall, and a fierce fight broke out, but the kuffar was successful in defending Constantinople, and immediately they managed to burn down the tower and everybody that was in it. But Muhammad al-Fatih, his resilience didn't decrease one bit. He ordered the building of 4 more towers. Immediately he ordered the building of 4 more towers to attack Constantinople. On 24th of May, realizing that Constantinople was probably going to fall, it was being attacked from all sides, the Emperor Constantine XI, he consulted his people about the worsening situation. But they said that they rather preferred to die rather than surrender their city. So they were brave soldiers. Yeah, these Byzantines, you got to give it to them. They stood their ground, and they said, we're going to fight, okay, and get their version of their shahada. Whatever it was in Jahannam somewhere. Then a few incidences happened that completely demoralized them. On the 25th of May, they bought the statue of the Virgin Mary, of Maryam alayhi salam. They bought the statue and they're beginning to worship the statue, because they're saying, give us victory, and they're worshipping the statue. And then while they were praying to it and asking for victory, this statue, it got destroyed. While they were making dua to this statue. Not only this, on the 26th of May, there was heavy rain and lightning struck the famous church of Sophia, and it destroyed part of their church. Okay? So the kuffar, they're beginning to feel there's this bad omens now, Bad omen has struck them, and they've got nobody to rely on anymore. The statue is broken, the church is broken, the cross is broken. What can they do? And they thought that, look, we should give up and surrender, and we'll be given free passage. And still, Constantine, he refused. He said, no, I'm not going to give up. I want to die shaheed. So then Muhammad al-Fatih, he ordered the cannons to fire constant fire, that the cannon, this huge cannon they had built, it exploded. Okay, and it even killed that engineer, that Hungarian engineer. When it exploded, it killed him. Yes, he was shaheed as well. Then Muhammad al-Fatih, on the 27th of May, he ordered a final assault. And he said to his troops that make dua this night, and read Quran, and do Qiyam al-Layl, okay? And Muhammad al-Fatih himself looked at the weakened areas of the wall. Which parts of the wall of Constantinople was weakened? He himself did the inspection, and he ordered all the rest of his troops to rest and make dua and ask forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then on the 28th of May, he ordered the cannons to be fired at the weakened sections of the wall, and he told all his troops to rest. So that whole day, out of all the siege since it began from the 6th of April, this was the day that they had rest in. And so they rested, and the cannons, they continued to fire. And then on the 29th of May, after the day of rest, the Muslims, they attacked from all sides. from land and from sea, from the wall of the Golden Horn, the western wall, the wall paralleling the Sea of Marmara, they attacked it. And especially the western wall, because the troops had left their post and gone to the Golden Horn because they thought this is where the firepower was concentrated. Muhammad al-Fatih, he tricked them. He put lot of the firepower on the Golden Horn. So all the troops, they left the posts on the western wall and they went to the post on the Golden Horn. And then the Muslims, they managed to attack. And so he ordered one wave to attack of the local troops, of the ordinary troops. And that wave attacked, and after a heavy battle, Muhammad al-Fatih and heavy casualties on both sides, he ordered them to go back. And then he ordered fresh troops to attack again the western wall, and they attacked. And again a heavy battle occurred, and Muhammad al-Fatih, after hours of fighting, he ordered them to go back. And then this time the defenders were completely fatigued, and they'd lost, all power. And then again Muhammad al-Fatih orders a third strike with fresh troops. With fresh troops, he orders the strike. And the defenders were completely exhausted. And then again Muhammad al-Fatih says the third troops to go back. And now when the kuffar were completely exhausted and didn't have any power in them, Muhammad al-Fatih, he ordered the Muslims to attack the weakened section with everything that they have from cannons and arrows and javelins and rocks and stones and catapults, whatever they've got, they attacked, while the Muslims, they rested. So this further demoralized the troops on the western wall. To come to their aid, Constantine, the emperor, and Justinian, they came at that section to encourage their troops and spur them on for the attack. And then Muhammad al-Fatih, he orders wave after wave of the special Inkishari forces to hack away at the defenses. But because Constantine the 11th and Justinian, they were brave warriors, because they were there defending, the enemies could defend their walls still. Despite being completely demoralized, they were still able to hold their ground. This just shows how tough it was to attack and siege Constantinople. They still held their ground. And then Muhammad al-Fatih himself, with 30 of the bravest of the special forces of the Inkishari forces, and one of them, with their leader, his name was Hassan, he was a very large man, he himself saw an area of weakness and they attacked. And they managed to penetrate and go inside the walls of Constantinople. And not only this brave commander Hassan, he managed to hoist the flag of the Uthmani Khilafah. And they hoisted it on a town, on the post of Kekaporta. That was what its name was, Kekaporta. They hoisted this flag. And then, what happened when they hoisted this flag? The troops, the defenders that were on the Golden Horn, they know that the western wall is the strongest and the toughest. And they see that this flag has been hoisted. They think that the whole of the wall has been finished and smashed. And they know that this is the strongest wall. And they think, if this is the strongest wall and it's been, it's been sieged and it's been scaled, and the Muslims have been able to raise their flags, what chance do we have? And then they also began to desert, and they began to go away and leave their posts. And soon the Muslim flags were seen hoisted in all areas of the city of Constantinople. And this led to further demoralization, and then the armies, they left their posts, the soldiers left their posts, and they all went and hid inside churches. But the emperor himself, he didn't do this. He took off his robes as the leader and the king, and he wore ordinary soldiers' clothes, including Justinian. And they went and fought, and they were killed as ordinary soldiers, and they were Christian heroes. Now Muhammad al-Fatih, when he entered the city, all the people were hiding in their churches, because they thought Muhammad al-Fatih would cause a bloodshed and would cause a massacre. But then eventually they saw there's no point to this. There's no point in hiding in the churches, because Muhammad al-Fatih, had given them amnesty and said, you are free, and I'm not going to kill you, I'm not going to slaughter you. And so they realized the mercy in the heart of Muhammad al-Fatih. And then the Christians, they were allowed to keep their religion. They were allowed to keep, except for Hagia Sophia, which became a masjid, they're allowed to keep most of their Christian institutions. They're allowed to have their own courts between themselves on matters of civil and social issues. If there was a dispute between the Christian, or there was a marriage between the Christians, okay, any social issue, they could sort it out between themselves. And this is the Sharia. But if there was a case, a criminal case, or they had attacked a Muslim, or there's a case between a Muslim and a Kafir, then the Muslim courts would solve the issue. And so the Christians were allowed to live in Constantinople, okay, under the rule of the Muslims. And Muhammad al-Fatih, he renamed Constantinople Islambul. Okay, Islambul. And I don't know who turned it into Istanbul, but it should be called Islambul. Okay. Muhammad al-Fatih didn't stop there. He then conquered Greece, which was at that time known as Trebizond, and it was overrun in 1450. It was also overrun in 1451. Fatih also conquered Athens in 1456. He conquered Bosnia and Serbia in 1459, and the Crimea in 1475. And Muhammad al-Fatih, he died on the 3rd of May 14, who is regarded by all people, whether they are Muslims or Kuffar, as one of the greatest military leaders in history. And like it has been said, his plans are still studied today at the military institutions of the West. They study him, they study people like Khalid ibn Walid to see how he could conquer Constantinople. And you see, Muhammad al-Fatih, when he started by listening to one hadith. He listened to one hadith, which was that indeed Constantinople will be conquered at the hands of a man, so blessed will be that Emir of the army, and blessed will be the army. And he had the high aim and goal that I want to conquer Constantinople. And you know how old he was when Constantinople was conquered? He was 21 years old. 21 years old. And this was a very serious commander. At 21 years, he did all of this, all this planning and all this thinking he did at the age of 21. And the hadith also says that Constantinople will be conquered first, and then the second city that will be conquered after Constantinople will be Rome. This is in the hadith. When the Sahaba asked which of the two will be conquered first, he said first it will be Constantinople, and then it will be Rome. So maybe here amongst us is somebody, we've heard the hadith for the first time, and maybe we take it upon ourselves to be the conquerors of Rome and the Western world. أقول قولي هذا أستغفر الله لي ولكم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت